education, I think more than we realize.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a while for us to fully understand all of the changes.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, so I'm on, I guess.
Go for it.
Okay. Okay, well, so I'm Will Snyder. I work with the current issue for Mass Envirothon. And I'm very excited today because this webinar is going to be focused on the Massachusetts, the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Project of the Massachusetts environmental agencies. And it's a resource that teams will be able to find and get access to in their own communities. I'll let Carrieanne tell you more about it, but it's a very current resource, and it's a resource that's really, there's a lot of focus on water issues in towns across Massachusetts. Carrieanne is one of several people across the state who kind of are good at putting together teams like Envirothon teams with resource people in their communities. So she's going to give an overall picture of that program, and I'm going to let her introduce herself. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Will. So let's see. I will start sharing my screen. So as Will said, my name is Carrieanne Petrik. I am the regional coordinator for the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness, and we just say MVP for short because it's a long jumble full of words. So I'm the regional coordinator for the Berkshires and Hill Towns for the MVP program, which is as far west as you can get in Massachusetts. We border New York, Connecticut, and Vermont. My pronouns are they, them. And when I worked in an office and not in my living room, I was out of the Pittsfield office. So I'm here to talk to you a little bit about what this program is and how you can use it for your projects. And also just to sort of think about how you as young folks can participate in your towns. So the MVP program, municipal means town, city. It is about the communities that you live in. And the MVP program, what it does is that it's a grant program, and there are 2 grants, and they go towards funding climate resilience in municipalities. The first part of the program is what we call the planning grants. Municipalities apply for these planning grants, and they range from $15,000 to $100,000, and they take about 9 months. Communities come together and they talk about climate resilience in their communities, and they build a plan. And then that makes them eligible to apply for action grants. And action grants can range from $25,000 to $2 million. There's $10 million awarded annually. And these projects are then trying to take on some of the ideas that came out of the planning grants. And I'll get into each of these in a little bit. So why municipal vulnerability preparedness? There's all of these changes that are coming because of climate change, as you all know. And how we adapt and plan for these changes is very important. And the state has decided that giving money to municipalities is one really strong way to start supporting communities in building their climate resilience. And down here is the definition of what we call climate resiliency. And what's really important is this idea of rebounding stronger after these big events. So this map, I'm going to show it a bunch of times because I want you to get to know it for a variety of reasons. So these are all the towns in Massachusetts and cities. All of the ones that are in blue, regardless of the shade, have completed a planning grant. The ones that are in yellow are the ones that are actively doing planning grants right now. The ones in white have not done any planning grants. There's also, so there are 5, MVP has broken up the state into 5 regions, and each region has a regional coordinator like me. And we're all really nice, and we really like to talk to people, especially about their ideas about climate change and climate adaptations. And do you know who we hear from the least or almost never is young people. We talk to old people all the time, but we never have an opportunity to talk to young people about their ideas for how your town or city can be adapting and implementing actions to be more resilient to climate change. And I'm hoping that maybe through this first step of me presenting here, that we might be able to change that a little bit, because we really want to hear from you all. So these are the MVP core principles, and they're really important to us as core principles, and they're how we structure the program. All projects, so once a town goes through a planning grant process and they start thinking about adaptation action grant projects, these are the types of things that we really want communities to weave in. So these are looking at multiple benefits across the community, addressing identified climate change impacts, community outreach and engagement. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this for a second, because this is super important to us. Thinking about social resiliency. And so we have our landscape. The water moves through it, temperatures change, plants, animals, there's all these things happening in our natural environment. But the fact is that we as people are a part of that environment. And our social resiliency is one of these complex threads to thinking about climate resiliency. So doing community outreach and engagement is so important, because it helps build that larger web of social resiliency to help build climate resiliency. We're really interested in communities looking to climate data and prioritizing what we call nature-based solutions. We're interested in knowledge sharing across communities, focusing on environmental justice communities and other climate vulnerable communities. Which by some definitions, young people are automatically considered a climate vulnerable population. So again, hearing from you all is really important to us. And then thinking outside of the box and the borders. We are an adaptation program, so we are very interested in the new ideas. So I'm hoping that in learning more about your projects that we'll get to hear about some new ideas. So the planning grants, and why are these important to you? So as I had shown on the map, I think it's at 89% of the state has completed a planning grant, which means that all of those towns and cities, they've gotten some money from the state. They got a group of people together to learn about the hazards that your specific town or city was facing to climate change. And they then looked at maps, and they wrote out where all the problem areas are, such as Where does it flood? Where, you know, are the biggest problems to droughts? All these different things about climate change. And then they decided what could be some potential opportunities to adapt to those climate change issues. Again, not mitigation, not stopping, like, you know, reducing carbon dioxide, but actually how to adapt to what is happening. And so for your all's issue this year of water management and climate change, this is what we're talking about every day with an MVP. So again, going back to that map that I showed earlier, every town that has gone through a planning grant process has developed what's called a summary of findings report. And this report captures all of that information. So you could literally go onto this website, click this link, and find your town or your city's summary of findings report and find out, oh, okay, there's a major flooding issue that's been happening every year on Baptist Corner Road. And I know, and find out some more information about it. So once those planning grants are written, then that is when towns again become eligible for action grants. For those who are in communities that do not have planning grants, this is a great time to start talking to your select board, your city council, whoever it may be, about getting involved in the program. And I had said earlier that it was between $15,000 and $100,000 that's available for these planning grants. And one of the reasons why there's a range is because there's the traditional plan that we help pay for, but then there's this thing called an extended scope. And an extended scope in the grant world speak means like a mini project. And these mini projects can look like a bunch of different things. Some towns decide to look at their open space and develop what's called an open space and recreation plan. Some towns have been taking this expanded scope option and doing something totally different. For example, the town of Stockbridge out here in Western Mass is looking at the vulnerability of housing in terms of climate change. So let's say, for example, you live in one of these towns that doesn't have a planning grant and you're interested in maybe your town going through this process. You could also, there could be a extended scope project that's focused on some of your project ideas, or is even focused on maybe how to get young people involved in your town around climate resiliency work. So this is the type of thing that if you had any interest, definitely call or email your regional coordinator. We'd be happy to talk more. So again, here's the map of yellow ones are the towns that are actively doing planning grants right now. So they don't have these summary of findings reports, but if you're in one of these towns and you want information, email your regional coordinator. We're just such a resource of knowing who's doing what in a town and what reports being generated and how to get you information as fast as we could possibly get it to you. So definitely feel free to reach out to us. And then all of the blue towns, all of those summary findings are up on the website. So here is a few screenshots from Dennis out on Cape Cod, their summary of findings report. You can see there's pictures from their workshop. Obviously, this is pre-COVID, no masks, people close together. But the table of contents is what I want you to be able to check out, because here it breaks down the hazards, concerns, and strengths, and then the recommendations and the next steps. So here, some of their hazards are, coastal flooding, hurricanes, sea level rise, all having to do with water. And then they list out their different priority projects. So if you're needing to know what your town, what your problems are in your community and some potential projects, these summary of findings reports are a great place to start, because They have so much information already in them. So this is our website. It is resilientma.org/MVP. And this is what will come up for you. And if you go down to learning about MVP planning and action grants, which is over here in the MVP grant types on the right-hand side, if you go down here, this a lower red arrow, it shows you read MVP planning grant final reports by municipality. That's what you click on. And then it'll be alphabetical and you can find your town or city. If for some reason you can't find what you need, email me. I am even if you're not in my region, I am happy to help point you in the right direction and can send you a link, no problem. So you got your planning grant done. Now it's about action grants. So again, our core principles, we're looking for projects that try to hit as many different of these principles as possible, because this is how we feel these are the pillars in building really strong, resilient climate projects. So this is an example from Northampton where the city purchased an old golf course. And so golf courses are really complicated in terms of how they interact with the watershed. You know, as you know, I mean, they're not flat, but they're like compacted soils. They're highly treated. So there's a lot going on with how the water moves through them. And so here, Northampton decided, okay, what if we took this highly impacted site, this golf course, and then started piloting different nature-based solutions. So by nature-based solutions, you know, but in our world, that is thinking about how do we let nature do what nature does? So are there plants that could be put in place in an area where there's a lot of flooding that could help the water penetrate into the ground faster? Are there ways that the water's wanting to move through, but there are roads in the way? All of these different ideas. You know, wetlands, they're these incredible processes and spaces in the environment, and humans have really been challenged by wetlands and tried to remove them for development purposes, fill them in, do all sorts of stuff. But then we have all these challenges because the water has nowhere to go. So the Northampton project, it's very interesting for how it's how it's innovatively trying to think about water management. Another example is in Belchertown. They're replacing a water storage tank so that they could try to make the town more resilient to drought. So this past summer, we had a flash drought that came on very fast. And there were, most of the state was in a drought until maybe even as recently as the last 2 months. So thinking about how do municipalities become more resilient to drought. And this project is particularly interesting because it's also looking at how the high school uses water to irrigate their athletic fields. So the space that you're in every day well, not every day now, but that your school occupies every day, depending on what your situation is with being in school or not, these spaces have an impact on your municipal climate resiliency. And there are opportunities to think through them. Like, for example, how big is your parking lot? You know, your parking lot is what we call it is impervious. The water cannot get through your parking lots. It rains down and then it has to go to a drain, and then that pipe has to go somewhere. There are these things called porous pavers. So making a parking lot that has permeability in it, so this way the water can get through it, so then it goes into the ground and then actually is then a part of groundwater recharge. And if you think about how much parking lot there is and how many roads, that amount of space really starts adding up. And another thing that I learned recently that I thought was really interesting is that our lawns in Massachusetts, lawns are the most common land surface across the state. We have more lawn than we have forest, more lawn than farms, more lawn than parking lots or roads. And they are as permeable as a parking lot. So in terms of water moving through our surfaces, having all of these lawns around does the same thing as just being on a paved space. So that is also really interesting in terms of thinking about your communities of ways to be presenting projects that could have a really big impact. These action grants, right now, municipalities are in the process of putting together action grant projects for the MVP program. Our application period will be open sometime at the end of March. So one of the things that I wanted to, for you all to consider is, what if you all took your projects that you're working on right now and presented them to your municipalities as potential action grant projects for the MVP program? So it's just something to think about. It doesn't, maybe it's not this year, maybe it's next year, but there has yet to be a youth-driven MVP action grant project. And I think that it is time for that to change. So on this slide in particular, it shows all the regional coordinators and our emails and our phone numbers. Don't use my email, definitely, or don't use my phone number, sorry, call me, because where I live, I don't have cell phone service. But all of these regional coordinators, we talk to so many people in our regions about the different challenges that each town faces in terms of water. And lots of people talk to us. So if we can help you with your projects in any way, we would be really happy to do that. So I just wanted to plant that seed for you. And with that, that's actually the end of my presentation, just something that's short and sweet for you all to think about and to do a little bit of investigating of how you might learn more about water management issues in your town or city. So I don't know what we do, what happens next. We want to talk a little bit if anybody has any questions.
Definitely, we should hold on to you and talk for a little while, I think.
Let's talk.
I think that we may see some questions in the chat. Britta, can you keep an eye on that? I definitely have some questions I want to ask.
Great.
Okay. So well, one thing that I would like, maybe you could do it now, is get us back to, there are two slides that I wanted people to look at in particular: your definition of resilience, and then the MVP core principles. These are on the MVP website too.
They are. I'm going to get us there, Will.
Okay. And actually, these addresses will be good to keep up too. So.
So here is our climate resilience definition.
Yeah. Can I copy?
Would you like me to talk about it a little bit?
No, I'm looking at it from the perspective of definitions of sustainability and what I know about resilience is a very cool term because it can apply to ecosystems, it can apply to human communities, and it can apply to human individuals as a psychological thing. So it's a very cool concept to play with and use, I think, particularly because it's got rigorous science and social science definitions, as well as kind of the common usage. Ability of I need to clear stuff out of the way here. Ability of a community, that's key, to address the needs of their built, social, natural environment, anticipate, cope with, and rebound stronger, like that, from events and trends related to climate change. I just want to let that soak in a little bit. If you have particular things that you would say about that you've heard that people have responded to or that have resonated with people.
Well, I think I can talk, or I guess I'd like to offer a little bit of how it resonated for me and what has attracted me both to this field and this definition. That there, well, I guess, so I went to college a few times. I did drop out of high school and then found my way fairly quickly into college the first time and got a political science degree, and then wanted to get as far away from college as possible and spent a number of years farming, because that to me was like the most opposite from college as I could get. And then decided to go back to college to get a second bachelor's degree and do my master's work in geology. And when I was studying geology, I found myself in this lab during my work study that was a biogeochemistry lab. And I started realizing that these intersections of topics were the things that I was most interested in, because when we're talking about the earth and particularly about climate change, it's convenient to try to separate things out because it's so complicated. But the reality is that there's so much going on in a given space. And so climate resiliency is really asking us to try to take a step back, take a deep breath and not get too overwhelmed, but understand that so many different systems are at work in a given space, in a given moment. And that we don't have to hold all of that by ourselves. There are many partners around us that we can rely on that have expertise in different areas that can help us think about this. And an example is that often out here in Western Mass in particular, specifically in the Berkshires, it's very common in a floodplain. And so a floodplain is an area that's in a watershed near a stream or a river that usually floods when there's more water coming through the system. And these floodplains, sometimes they look bone dry. And floodplains are often areas where municipalities will put water treatment plants, because they are able to treat water and then discharge it out into a river. It's also a common place for affordable housing because the land there is very cheap because it floods. And so all of a sudden in this one space that's a floodplain that has huge vulnerabilities to climate change, you have these overlapping human impacts in terms of affordable housing, so vulnerable folks to flooding in terms of that. Let's say, for example, if a flood hits a home or an area with many homes in it, if you have a lot of money, you have a high adaptive capacity, because you could move and it's not a big deal, because maybe you can go and stay at another house that you have, or you could buy another house. If you don't have a lot of money, you can't do that. So your adaptive capacity is lower. So the adaptive capacity of folks living in a floodplain at an affordable housing area is low. And then they're also sited right next to a wastewater treatment plant. So their potential exposure to contamination is really high. So there's a lot of vulnerabilities going on there that are on top of how the water's moving through. And climate resiliency really lets us think about all of those different aspects.
That's great. I wanted to just stress for from the perspective of the Envirothon current issue, just to be clear to you and to teams, the part of the Envirothon competition is basically the presentation of the team's research and recommendations for their town. It's and a lot of times the teams take that research, what they've learned, and they turn it into a project, an action project that actually works with the town or makes a difference in some way. But it's based on a thorough research that they're supposed to do. That's often a difference from a lot of community service projects, where people just dive into the project without really understanding the whole background and who's involved and why they're doing it. So that's, we try to get teams to focus on that background piece. And then a lot of them get very excited and they take it into action, and you are providing a very cool conduit for teams to take action. It may be that they find that there's a team, that there are people in their town who are already engaged in a project that they want to take part in, that the team wants to lend a hand in. Or it may be, as you're pointing out, that there are some issues in the town that are not being addressed, that from a young person's perspective need to be addressed. And the MVP program, I mean, sometimes Envirothon teams do that. They do that on their own, but this provides a kind of a frame that they can use to actually go to their town and say, look, this needs to be done. Here's money that you can do it with. We'd like to help. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's the opportunity that's being presented here. If teams in their research decide that this is something they want to do.
Absolutely. And if a team was uncertain who to talk to in the town, I encourage you to reach out to your MVP coordinator, or even if I'm not your coordinator, again, you can reach out to me and I'll help introduce you to the right person to connect you with. But we, often work with our town and city officials, planning boards, select boards, city councils, mayors. We're talking to these people on a regular basis. And we might be able to sort of pull together a group of people who would be very interested in hearing what you have to say.
Yeah, I'm glad that you emphasized that talking to people piece. That's really important for us. And as I see that a lot of towns have created these summary of findings reports. That one was very pretty.
It wasn't it? That's why I picked it. I asked my teammates, I said, who made the prettiest one?
Yeah, well, I hope that some towns put their effort into the actual contents as well as the as the formatting. But I guess what I want to say to teams is that that summary of findings gives you a huge head start, but don't stop there. You should be looking at those findings and figuring out who you need to contact to get more information, to actually talk to the people behind that report. The report gives you a big head start in what questions to ask them, but don't stop there. It's really important to talk to the people who are behind that report and get to know kind of their perspectives on the issues in your community. There may be some differences of opinion that got smoothed out in that report that you can kind of unearth and find out what you know, what the back and forth and what the kind of interesting details of the issues were. Yeah, so right on that Resilient MA website, you can find those links.
There's also on here underneath the grant types is called the MVP toolkits. And these toolkits, they're really interesting. We have, I think there's 4 of them right now. There's one on climate change and public health. There's one on environmental justice communities and equity. There's another one on community engagement. And then the last one is on nature-based solutions. And each one of these toolkits has just a deeper dive into these particular topics. And they also have case studies associated with them from different towns across the state and cities that have been doing MVP action grant projects that are tying in these different topics. So I highly encourage you to just browse around to get some ideas of what different municipalities are doing and how you might be able to learn more.
Kelly, you don't want to say this yourself?
I could.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I've sat in on several core teams and workshop teams in the Wachusett watershed towns, and for background research for the teams, sitting in on one of these or having the ability to, you would have most town officials in one room. Get to hear about what's important to them and also get your voices heard. So you could kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone. So I think it's great if you can have the opportunity to get involved.
So you're saying that these are the meetings that end up producing the summary of findings?
Yes.
Yeah.
Some communities, I think, Kelly, also in your region, they have MVP core team meetings that even meet after the summary of findings. And that's sort of like the group of folks that then hold the process, like hold the town in getting them writing action grants as well. So there are opportunities to meet with these core teams at different ways. And I think that every single one of them would be so thrilled to have a team or a representative from a team come and participate, listen in, share in their meetings.
Yeah, I think it would be great.
So Jess Collins from Doherty High School in Worcester is saying she sees on your map that Worcester has an ongoing action grant. Is there a way to see that grant? She's only finding the summary of findings.
Right. So if you are interested in learning more about a current action grant, let's see. Oops, I forgot I'm not on the internet. I'm in my slideshow. There is where it says the planning grant on that same page. If you scroll down, you'll see it says MVP action grant. You can see all of the current action grants, as well as all of the deliverables from past action grants. So let's say a town decided to do a culvert assessment across their town in stormwater management, and they produced a report that looked at all of their culverts and all of their flooding. You could find that report on this website as well. But if you're not finding the information about the current project, for Worcester, Hillary King is the regional coordinator, and you can just shoot her an email and say, all of my team knows that I'm on this webinar, and they're all very excited for me to be representing all of us. So if you want to reach out to her and get some more information, I know she would be happy to share what she has and connect you with whoever she can.
Yeah, your role as your roles as coordinators of these districts, it reminds me of the watershed initiative of 20 years ago, where all the agencies were working together, and there were these watershed team leaders whose specialty was, or special interest was, community outreach and connections among players in the community. And they were just a gold mine. And it sounds like these coordinators are like a first stop for our teams. I mean, to look at the website, look at their town, and then go straight to the coordinators to learn more about what they found and get suggestions for who to talk to. Is that fair?
I think so. Absolutely. We have a lot of connections that we can offer to various folks and teams and to projects. And what we have been, so this past winter or late fall, we did a survey of municipalities to learn about how the MVP program is doing and where we can do better. And one of the things that we found is that municipalities really struggled with community engagement and how to do that. And as, let's see, sorry, I went too far. As you can see in our core principles, community outreach engagement is a really important part of our program. And we have $10 million that we get to work with, which is a lot of money. But when you get asked, we had over $46 million in applications. So the projects that got funded had to be very competitive, which meant that they had to really hit on as many core principles as possible. And so because municipalities were telling us that they were looking for support from the regional coordinators in both doing community outreach and in building regional collaboratives, having the opportunity to talk with teams and students in the area, not only is it a benefit to you all, but you would be a benefit to your town, because your presence, participation, and ideas that you could bring to the town will help them develop stronger action grant projects by your participation and presence. So it would very much work both ways. So the RCs, the regional coordinators, are very happy to work as a connector and to offer information in whatever ways that we can.
Other questions? Matt? Actually, I'm just really curious about this. Lawns as the most common land surface in Massachusetts.
Right?
That's amazing.
I know. That's like our big, and we're not, I I get to learn so much at my job about all these different things. And I'm just so grateful that I mean, it's like my dream job.
Yeah.
And learning about the impact of lawns has been just blowing my mind. And just really learning how important the different ways that we manage soils. And the state is doing some work, and I know very little about it, but it's a healthy soils bill initiative.
Yep.
And there's a working group around healthy soils, and it's really looking at these different management practices. But one of the things that I love, I mean, I don't really love lawns generally, but one of the things that I love about this idea of lawns is that it allows each one of us individually to think about how we play a role in our watershed and in management, and that we can plant different things and tear up our lawns and, you know, grow things for pollinators, and just we can have an impact in our small little space. And that always excites me.
So I know that, I mean, lawns can't be quite as impervious as a parking lot. I know because it does eventually seep in. The water does infiltrate, but I think it is compared to like a farm field or you know, a hay field or a forest, especially a forest soil, that there's a lot less infiltration, a lot more runoff. That's one thing you should know is that the new person who is doing the soils part of the Envirothon, she is involved with that Healthy Soils initiative.
Nice.
And she's interested in making these kinds of connections. And in fact, the Envirothon teams are going to be, am I letting the cat out of the bag here when I talk about what the soils, water, wildlife, and forest questions are going to be about, but teams are going to be looking at impervious soils, parking lots, and like turning a forest soil into a high school lawn, for example, and what, you know, whether maybe they should be looking at that as one big impervious soil rather than a parking lot and a much more pervious soil. Anyway, we'll be considering this. Teams will be considering this in the current issue, but also in the rest of the competition too. I think that's a really big issue. And one of the questions would be, I guess, how to turn your suburban lawn into a rain garden, essentially, so that the water soaks in rather than running off. Kelly's quiet, but she knows a lot about this stuff too.
And then how to get your neighbors to do it too. And then is there a way to get your town or city to maybe create a zoning ordinance, you know, so that is what everybody does, as opposed to, you know, I mean, there are places where you're required to mow your lawn and keep it so high and have all of these different things. So are there ways, you know, again, it's like these intersections of policy and management and all these different things.
Yeah. So if people say, well, your neighbor's saying, why don't you mow your lawn? You say, well, climate change.
Right.
And I'm not talking about my gas-powered mower.
Right.
Anyway, that's just an aside, but I think it can show teams how interrelated and multifaceted this issue can be. them.
Absolutely.
I guess one of the things I wanted to point out to teams is that the MVP program you should definitely, if you want to participate in the Community Research Award program this year, you got to talk to your MVP program in your town. That's a requirement for your research. And then just to point out too that we do, you know, in addition to all the internal value of doing an action project, Envirothon does offer an action award to teams that take their research and put it to work in their community. So we try to, when a team does that, we try to give them as much celebration and recognition as possible.
Nice.
Their superintendent, their state legislators, all get a letter describing what the team did.
Awesome.
Well, I guess I hate to let you go, but I don't know if you have any final thoughts for teams. That I think we're going to be recommending that a lot of teams take a look at this webinar. And so any final points that you'd like to make for them?
I think that my final point is to not be afraid to ask a question, and that's a brave thing to do. And sometimes it can be hard to reach out to somebody who you don't know, particularly a grown-up, to ask a question. But just know that at least for my team, we are here and excited to help in any way that we can. And please ask us questions.
Amen. And I would just add that a lot of these people are as fortunately or unfortunately are as close as your computer screen to talk to.
Right.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to be here. And hopefully I'll hear from someone at some point. I wish I could like give somebody a prize if they like called me first. Well, not called, if they emailed me first. Like I could like give you a chocolate bar through the computer, but that won't work. But maybe somebody will give you a chocolate bar somewhere.
We'll get there. We'll get there. Yeah.
Well, thank you all so much. I really appreciate it, and keep up the great work. It's been so fun learning about what you all are doing.
Yeah, we'd like to, I mean, climate change is part of what the Envirothon current issue looks at in general, related to every issue that we look at. So I hope we'll be able to continue this relationship past these water issues into the future. So
absolutely.
Thank you very much,
Carrie. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Thanks.
Bye.